Welcome to the HRLocker podcast. On today's show we have Deirdre Carbery, Human Security and Gender Advisor. Deirdre is a security strategist, gender advisor and military veteran. She has also previously held the appointment of Chief Instructor in the United Nations Training School Ireland and previously worked with the United Nations and NATO to progress the women, peace and security agenda internationally. Since retiring from the military in January 2020, Deirdre works with Facebook as a global security strategist and continues to provide consultancy services to organisations internationally. On the podcast today, Deirdre explains to us the difference between gender pay gap and equal pay, how to create a diverse and inclusive workplace, and she gives us some great resources on how to get started. Our host today is Christelle Rinn, Chief Marketing Officer at HRLocker, and she talks to Deirdre about the findings of a recent HRLocker survey on gender pay gap reporting, what companies are bound by law to report on it, and why every company, no matter what its size, should do it. If you'd like a copy of this report, it's free to download on hrlocker.com/free downloads. This is a fantastic podcast packed full of interesting facts and information, and we really hope you enjoy it.
Today we have the wonderful Deirdre Carbery with us, who we're very excited to have with us, and we're going to be talking a bit about diversity, gender pay gap, and those kind of diversity inclusion issues. So Deirdre, we're super happy to have you here today. And to start us off, if you could maybe tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, Christelle. Yes, I'm delighted to be here. My name is Deirdre Carbery. I'm a gender equality and diversity and inclusion advisor. So I recently moved into the private sector and a totally new industry after 15 years in the Irish Defence Forces. In the Army, I was an infantry officer. I took command of my first platoon of 32 soldiers way back at the age of 20 in 2006. And I've also served in a range of roles, both at home and overseas. I've instructed with international academic institutions on human rights and gender. I've held operational roles, advisor roles, and also worked with the United Nations in Lebanon and the Democratic Republic of Congo in what I would say were highly challenging and volatile environments.
Absolutely, yeah. So through all that, we're here today. And I mean, before we go into things, do you miss being in that environment, or are you kind of happy to have moved into that kind of private sector?
I think it was amazing for the nearly 16 years that I served. And I think particularly as someone at the age of 18 going into, I guess nearly immediately a managerial role and quite challenging roles, I think it provided me with some incredible experiences and opportunities and skills that I now see how critical they are in operating effectively and efficiently in the private sector, and particularly in this very uncertain and challenging time around COVID. My resilience levels and my ability to adapt, be flexible, I think all of that has come from my time and those formative years in the Defence Forces. So certainly look back with incredibly fond memories, but very excited to now enter this new private sector world.
And I think one of the things that when we were chatting beforehand that's really kind of stuck with me is that, you know, when there's natural disasters or pandemics or things like that, they don't have any, they're not picking and choosing in terms of it should affect everybody equally, but it doesn't in terms of the way our society is set up. But, you know, they don't, when there's a natural disaster, it doesn't stop and say, which way am I going?
Yeah, no, exactly. Because when we look at it, gender, and that is someone's perceived value in a given context, as opposed to the sex a person is born, we see it's a key issue that cross-cuts every facet of what we do, how we interact, the opportunities we are given, how we are treated, and the expectations placed on us as well, both as men and women. So, like, we know we're all products of the community and society we're born into, and we're shaped by it. So we can't, look at, if we take our employee populations, for example, we can't look at them in a silo. They're very much, products of our societies. And then obviously, the inequalities that are present in our societies.
So at the moment, we have these buzzwords. We have our gender diversity programs in the workplace. We have pay gap reporting that we have to do. We have diversity and inclusion that we need to be doing. And they're all things that, in HR that people are ticking off saying that we have to do. But what exactly is the state of play, and how far ahead or behind are we in the UK and Ireland?
I think the term buzzwords is really interesting, and I do definitely see that for so many companies and organizations, if we don't have meaning behind it. And we generally see this increased push coincidentally around March each year to coincide with International Women's Day. We see this push by companies and lots of what I like to call like women in events being run, like women in leadership, women in tech, women in finance. But I guess for me, I always ask the question now, how many of these companies or organizations have robust maternity and paternity policies in place? Or how many of our companies support and encourage their employees to avail of these policies, or has a culture that normalizes men, for example, taking maternity or paternity leave? Or, when we look at permanent remote or smart working options that support equitable participation in the workforce by all employees, are these in place? And critically, how many women speakers are included in panel discussions or as keynote speakers every other month of the year, so outside of March? And I probably should also kind of stress at this point, diversity and inclusion isn't just, as we know, about women and men. It's about the inclusion and equitable participation of everyone, disabled employees, our LGBTQ plus employees, ethnic groups. And it's about celebrating and promoting cognitive diversity as well as diversity in terms of experience and backgrounds. So we definitely need to take this kind of holistic approach when we formulate and when we're talking about and actioning our D&I strategies, because, I mean, put simply, I guess, diversity is a fact of life. We're all diverse in our own ways, but equity and providing equity of opportunity to all employees is a choice, and a proactive choice that we as employers, CEOs, leaders, HR teams, we must make. And I think out of that, inclusion is something that we also must take proactive action on, because it encompasses workplace culture, policies, language, physical workspaces, and something that I'm a big fan of as well is accountability and holding people accountable. So I think when you take those elements, belonging and productivity is ultimately the outcome of that. And you mentioned what exactly is the state of play in 2021. I think we're in a really interesting year, because pre-COVID, we saw globally back in 2019, less than half, I think it was 47.7% of all women participated in the labour force, which was actually a decrease from nearly 51% in 1990. And on the flip side of that, nearly 3 in 4, almost 75% of men participated in the labour force, which is again actually down from 80.2% in 1990. And what we see from the data from the pre-COVID period is structural barriers and cultural restrictions are two factors that are contributing to this gender gap in the labour force. And despite an increase of women pursuing higher education globally, a gender gap in employment rates remains high amongst educated women and men in some countries, with the unpaid caregiving responsibilities falling to women, to women essentially, so disproportionately falling on women. I think, if we compare males and females globally, 1.5% men accounts for about 41 million men provide unpaid care on a full-time basis, compared to almost 22% or 606 million women. Wow. So there's a massive diversity there. But again, broadening out, I guess, the scope of D&I as well. If we take the UK, for example, or the UK and the US, over 19% of the UK and US workforce are disabled, yet adults with disabilities are twice as likely to be unemployed, which I think is incredibly interesting as well. So we're seeing very few companies specifically target this pool of talent or provide the right environment for work. But we fast forward now to the state of play in 2021. Last year was an incredibly challenging, volatile, uncertain year. But in 2021, for both women and men, the global labor force participation rate is declining. But we do see women on average less likely to participate in the labor force than men.
Even, yeah, it's interesting. You know what you said, which I think is one of the most important things, is most companies will have policies around this, but whether they actually proactively encourage them is the key, right? I mean, if we have parental leave, paternity leave for males, everything is equal, but we really just don't push that because, it's something that we have and we're ticking a box. We talk about it in March and never again, right?
Definitely. I think the policies are great. They're they form the foundations, but around that, we also have to have a culture that supports and encourages people to avail of those policies, because that really is key. And I also think as well, if people are looking for resources on where we are, the current state of play, how we compare to other countries as well, how are we doing in Ireland and the UK? A great resource that I like to look at is the EU Gender Equality Index. Okay. And it's essentially looking at a lot of cross-cutting elements, everything from education to political representation, economic power, our participation rates in the labour force. And it forms a composite indicator that measures what I would say is a very complex concept of gender equality. And it obviously monitors the progress of gender equality in the EU over time as well. So for Ireland, we see within the EU, we're ranking 7th. And this is just behind the UK, who are 6th. And we do see, still, if we track the index, slow progress has been made with progressing gender equality, but we still see, the gendered division of labour. We still see that women and girls already do most of the unpaid care work. But unsurprisingly, probably to many of the listeners, we do see the Nordic countries really taking the lead in terms of the progress they've made to progress gender equality across their sectors. So we have like Sweden and Denmark as number 1 and number 2 in the EU. And I think, we can learn a lot, I think, from the progressive policies and structures put in place by our Nordic counterparts. Yeah, because they have very progressive both maternity and paternity leave for both male and female. Which I do think, I wonder in time, will it be adapted throughout the EU, because it does seem to be kind of leveling the playing field somewhat for those countries. One of the things that, so it's mandated already in the UK, it's coming into Ireland this year, is in regards to that mandatory gender pay gap for 250 plus employees in a company. Do you think these kind of mandating of that kind of, now again, we're talking gender pay gap here, not in terms of the entire diversity, because I think that's a broader issue. Yes.
But this is, do you think it's enough? Like, should companies be, we're starting at the top that they've got all these policies, but are we really advocating for them? Probably not. So now they're being mandated to report on, well, where actually are they in the gender pay gap? Is it enough? Should we be doing more? Is it a benefit?
Yeah, another great question. And I think I have heard some confusion out there as well. What is the gender pay gap? And people are confusing it, I guess, with equal pay as well. So for people that might be just uncertain, and obviously this is something that is impacting or about to impact on us all. The pay gap is the difference in average pay between the two groups in a workforce. And in the case of the gender pay gap, it's the difference in average hourly pay between males and females in the workforce. So the pay gap and equal pay are different, with obviously equal pay being paid for the same kind of or similar work. But I guess to come back to your question, I believe that those who choose to see the gender pay gap reporting as an opportunity to enact change will certainly experience the countless benefits associated with having a more diverse and inclusive workforce, forming what I would say is an integral part of a more prosperous and more equal economy and society across Ireland and the UK. I don't think it's anything small. I actually think this has the potential to transform a lot of what we're seeing. And I think smart working, including flexible and family-friendly working conditions, it's been the most common action taken to address the gender pay gap in the UK, for example. And while smart working is something that needs to be available to and availed of by people of both sexes, all genders, and independent of family status in order to be effective, I think the unavailability of flexible working conditions affects women disproportionately, because this typically results in fewer women at senior levels of an organization, which again, in turn, impacts the gender pay gap. And I also think it's really important, I guess, to also look at the gender pay gap and the impact of COVID. It would probably be remiss of us not to mention it, because, you know, we're seeing from all the data and the research and even the figures that I mentioned earlier, that women are more likely to work part-time than men, are more likely to work in insecure hourly employment and in the hardest hit sectors as well, such as, you know, hospitality and retail. And women do tend to earn less and take on more of
jobs,
childcare. Yeah, definitely. So this has fed into women doing most of the juggling right now. And while this is probably bad enough, there's also a risk that the current situation with the pandemic could create a vicious circle, which will mean the gender pay gap is even bigger when we come out the other side. But on the GPG, one of the most direct routes to closing the gender pay gap is pay transparency that makes pay gaps visible throughout our organizations. So I would strongly advocate for, even if we don't meet the 250 plus employee threshold, that this is something that will only enhance your organization. This is something that will only benefit your organization long term. So would definitely encourage even those that don't meet the threshold to conduct a pay audit.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that as well. I think that, you know, for HR managers or even CEOs of a company, you know, it's useful information to be able to look at to make sure that you are keeping on top of it. The other thing which I find really interesting is it's kind of passionate subject of my own, is that you know, I've been with our company now kind of 13 years and started as a graduate. Through that time, I've had 3 children. So, you know, so I have a school drop off at 9 o'clock in the morning, which means I start a little bit later. I start at 9:15. Obviously not at the moment because they're all at home, but when that day comes where I can send them back to school. However, we do have a very progressive management team, and that hasn't hampered me to progressing to a senior management level, because it's kind of understood that I need that flexibility, because I need to go part-time, which is a lot of companies, that's really the only option, because you've got to do that school drop-off. So I think that flexibility, regardless, it shouldn't only just be for male and female, around that family balance is the key to gender pay gap, to bridging that gap, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think flexibility is definitely the key term there. And I think there's another question in terms of when we look at the pay gap, you know, is it a gender pay gap, or, you know, is it also a maternity pay gap?
Yeah.
So, and it's something that I think requires just, you know, a little bit more research into as well, and a little bit more engagement, and, you know, asking ourselves, do employers and our HR teams view pregnancy and maternity leave as a burden or an issue? Mm-hmm. Or are we actually positively framing and supporting and planning for a portion of our workforce to take maternity leave? And do we have programs in place to proactively support the return to work? And again, look at those flexible work arrangements that can actually just drive that progress.
The amount of flexibility that has been required in the last 12 months, both male and female, any diversity issues, we've seen that it can work. So, I mean, I just think if we look at all that's happened over the last 12 months, how do you think HR really needs to embrace that kind of flexibility and what's happened in the last 12 months and bring that forward to the boardroom or CEO and say, flexibility it works, right?
Yeah, I think you're so right.
$1 million question for you.
Yeah, but what it comes down to is people. I mean, people are central to how effectively and how efficiently our organizations operate, and we can't view people in this vacuum. And people that don't have responsibilities are available to us 24/7. As we mentioned, we're all products of our societies, our upbringings, of our cultural and religious influences. We all have demands on our time. And I think understanding our people and what's shaping how we work, and not isolating our workforce from wider society and our employees' wider responsibilities, really is going to enhance, I guess, our ability to create these robust, efficient, effective workforces. And equity of opportunity in our work can only be realized if we frame it as benefiting both sexes, and ultimately increasing our operational effectivity as companies. And it's all people centered. My work as a gender advisor has highlighted for me the importance of equitable, inclusive, diverse organizations, and how without clear and measurable actions backed up by, as we said, those important comprehensive policies, but also leaders who are willing to hold individuals accountable for inaction, we are going to lose our talent and the richness, I think, that comes from that diversity and equality. So yeah,
I think you're right. And I'm going to make quite a sweeping statement. Is even though most companies have policies around paternity leave for men and parental leave for men, I don't think it's hugely embraced.
I agree. I do agree. And I think it's, we do have to model behavior as well. And we do have to maybe role model as well what we want.
From the top.
Yes, from the top. And I think it makes it more acceptable as well. And, I see my husband, now we're, a few weeks out from having our first child. He is in quite a traditional conservative organization. And, he does want to take time out. He wants to take 6 months out to take care of the baby. And it's interesting as well, seeing him go through that process and seeing how people are reacting to it, and people's, I guess, he's not fulfilling people's maybe expectations of the role that a man should be playing. Yet the possibilities, I mean, they're available to him, and taking the time out is available to him, but just not many before him have done it. So, kind of, I would like to think that once one does it and others see that, others will follow suit, and we start seeing this transformation within companies. But it all does start with that role modeling and making it not only acceptable, but encouraging it and championing people who are taking and availing of those policies,
so that it becomes normal.
I think for our HR teams as well, when we look at promoting and ensuring that gender diversity is part of the company policy, it's really also about keeping it front and center, all year round. I think that's the key as well. And a term I love to use when I talk about this is mainstreaming gender equality and mainstreaming diversity into our processes, not having this as a kind of a separate entity or an add-on. And it really is, everything from how and who we hire, to taking some really simple steps, but what I think are some really effective steps when it comes to subtly addressing some underlying biases that may exist. Like, for example, when we're running a leadership seminar or conference and are choosing speakers, we don't need to create this, special category for women to speak on women's leadership.
Exactly.
But rather, inclusion on our main panel of speakers as a keynote speaker will support a more inclusive event. And I mean, I look back at my own career, and I've attended entire leadership conferences and have completed leadership modules within training institutions where the only voices and examples of leadership showcased were men. So we can really subtly, mainstream our messaging and our diversity policies throughout our company processes and activities. opportunities as well. And I guess just highlight that gender diverse companies are more likely to perform 15% better than those that aren't diverse. And importantly, ethnically diverse companies are more likely to perform 35% better. And this is actually recent research from nearly 370 public companies who were surveyed from different countries in the Western world. And I thought those two key findings, were really interesting as well to, drive this support for greater diversity and inclusion.
Exactly, that it's not just ticking a box. You're actually going to benefit from it.
Definitely.
Do you think that, obviously we had 12 months of remote working, do you think that remote working has any effect on diversity and inclusion issues?
I do, but I'll caveat it. I think in every crisis lies an opportunity. And if we grasp it, this could be an opportunity to deliver more equitable workplaces long term. And I think, when we look back at the last 12 months, it has brought significant challenges and upheaval, but also has brought about some really positive disruption. Which again, I'm using the word potential, but I think it has the potential to result in real progress in the workplace. And as we slowly return to normality, I think that term you used, I think flexibility will become the new competitive advantage. And we probably have to ask ourselves, why has it taken COVID-19 to catapult us into a situation where smart working en masse is the rule and not the exception? But I also think a better question to ask is how we make the most of this unexpected kind of nearly experiment that was thrust upon us, because it has provided an opportunity to re-examine our way of working. And I think re-examine everything from culture to our operating models, how we communicate, and people management as well. And I think for me, it's amazing what becomes possible in times of crisis. And we see that the previously unimaginable becomes reality. And in terms of D&I, if we look at, say, disabled workers as an example, remote work does have the potential to level the playing field for disabled workers, but not because actually working from home has become the new norm, but the pandemic has forced many businesses to consider more agile and innovative workspaces, which provide the ability to adapt quickly and easily to changes. It gives us the opportunity that to disabled workers gives more freedom of choice, which is only a good thing. And my hope is that this shift to more agile working means we're likely to see an uprise of job opportunities for disabled workers as well.
My last question to you, Deirdre, and I think people hate when I ask this, I'm not sure, is what do you think the future of work will be?
I think in 2021, flexible working is no longer a matter of debate for employers, but a necessity to maintain productivity. So during 2021, I think employers are likely to be asked to afford their workforces more freedom in choosing their working hours and locations. And, we'll see that simple things, this will put increased strain, not only on health and safety responsibilities, but also when we look at, things that impact on our business, security, compliance, privacy. So we're definitely going to have to forecast how a lot of these changes are going to impact on our companies and our businesses long term. I think an uncertainty around the pandemic will persist throughout this year, but as a result of that, I think the mental health strain on employees and the need for individual support will continue. I think distance working as well has also challenged some of those traditional methods of teamwork and innovation. So as colleagues cannot work in close proximity, I think as HR managers, we are going to have to look at what tools and skills we are imparting in our managers, and we are developing in our managers to manage this remote workforce, because it is much more difficult. I mean, it's not what we're used to. It's not our experience, and I think managing remotely requires an enhanced set of skills. And definitely an enhanced ability to engage with our workers as well. So that skills development piece, I think, will be key for our companies to thrive in this new normal. We do have the opportunity, and this is, I guess, the point that I'd love to emphasize. We do have just a once in a lifetime opportunity to create fairer, more equitable workplaces. But again, this is all based on the proactive actions that we take now to drive this change and making sure that this change can be sustainable in the long term.
Yeah, you said earlier that we've had this 12-month experiment, and I think that's the key, is that we've had it. There have been lots of negatives. There've been some great things that we can learn from it, and I think what I do like to stress as well is that, so we've had this 12 months, and absolutely, look, we're living with COVID now. It's not going in June. It's going to be, there's going to be some element of it here for at least the next 12 months minimum. We are no longer in this reactive state. It's about being proactive at this stage, because let's take from the learnings and figure out what we can do going forward to benefit us. Deirdre, it's been so wonderful talking to you. I've really enjoyed it. I could do another hour.
I could probably talk for another hour, but I won't subject you to it.
Thank you so much. Deirdre, if people want to get in contact, the best way to do it is through LinkedIn or?
Yeah, definitely LinkedIn, Deirdre Carbery, Carbery. And yeah, I would be delighted to connect and support in any way I can.
Thank you so much. It's been so wonderful. So we'll have we'll have Deirdre's link to LinkedIn at the bottom of this, and certainly thank you so much for talking to us, and talk to you soon, Deirdre.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. Check us out at HRLocker.com. The show was hosted by Christelle Rinn and produced by Jenny Martin. Subscribe to catch the latest episodes on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. If you'd like to feature, get in touch by emailing us at marketing@HRLocker.com. You can also follow HRLocker on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn.